Hello and welcome to another broadcast of the Voice of Liberty. We're glad to have you with us today. Today we have a special treat. Missionary James Baxter is with us. He and his family have been on the field in South Sudan, Africa. And so for those that are listening on radio, we hope you'll listen to the whole program, probably be done in 2 segments. And those that are watching on YouTube and Facebook, we're glad to have you with us as well. As always, the email address is libertybaptistbg@gmail.com. If you'd like to reach out with questions, maybe follow-up questions for Brother James here in just a little bit, and also for prayer requests and information. And so without any further ado, we'll get into things today. Brother Baxter, thank you for being with us on the broadcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, just wanted to kind of get folks to get to know you. If you could take just a minute, tell us about where you were born, where you were raised, when you got saved, and just kind of some introductory background for the listeners today.
Sure. So I was raised in Michigan, Muskegon, Michigan, West Michigan, and big family of 13, and I was number 10 of 13, and my parents wish I would have stopped at 9, but I was number 10, homeschooled my whole life. I went to Bible college, saved when I was 11 years old at Circle C Baptist Ranch. We worked on staff there together, and called into missions.
Amen.
And when I was saved, I remember I was 12 years old at a missions conference. We had a missionary to Tanzania, Africa, who came in and was presenting missions in Africa. Our church had missionaries every year for our missions conference. I remember the Lord, if He felt like He was calling me to Africa, I wasn't sure. I was 12. And but we put a map up of Africa in our basement, my mom and I actually, and we prayed over every country in Africa. I remember we had an old encyclopedia, and I was just looking up different countries. And I remember the Lord began to work on my heart to go to Sudan. Now, South Sudan wasn't around at that time. It was, in 2011, they gained their independence.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the history of that, because I think one of the things you all would put on your literature and your prayer cards is the newest country in Africa. Explain that to us.
It's the newest country in the world. And so when they gained their independence in 2011, and they had been fighting for independence since the 80s.
Wow.
Over 1.5 million people died in the fighting. And there was a man named Dr. John Gehring. I believe he went to college here in Iowa.
Wow.
Actually went over there and really was the mastermind, led the coup. He was a brilliant man. He died before they gained their independence. But so when they gained their independence, the country opened to missionaries. It had been previously closed. You could get in kind of under different visas, but it was largely closed to missions. So when they gained their independence in 2011, they became wide open.
Wow.
They were also asking for help. So I was able to take a trip there with my pastor in 2012. We were there on their first anniversary. And
as a country.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, it was wild. Nobody slept that night. Guns shooting everywhere. It was just wild. They were excited. And that was their first anniversary. And through that trip, the Lord really confirmed in my heart that that's where He wanted me to serve. Now, it took me a moment to surrender because I didn't at first surrender to going there. That was my first missions trip. And I was 16. It was largely just overwhelming.
Sure.
There were so much different things, different culture, different language, different practice. It was wild.
Sure.
And I remember the airport alone was just a little dirt strip. This is their international airport in the capital city.
Wow.
And when we landed, we got off the plane. There was 9 of us. We were like happy tourists, taking pictures of everything. And we immediately got our phones confiscated because they didn't want us.
By the government?
By the military.
Wow. Okay.
For taking pictures of their international airport.
How about
Which
that?
was nothing.
Sure.
And we went into a room, I don't know, maybe 50 by 50. And or even smaller than that. It was a small room. There was several people in there, and there was a hole in the wall, and they started throwing our suitcases through a hole in the wall.
Wow.
And that was like my introduction to missions. When we were flying in, Juba sits on the Nile River, and I remember the sun was sparkling off the Nile River, and I thought, man, this is where God wants me. Then we landed, and all that kind of craziness happened, and I thought, man, this is not where God wants me, you know? And
Sure.
so there was a little bit of surrender that took place. But through that, the Lord really confirmed my calling.
Sure.
And now we've been, let me just answer questions one at a time.
No, this is great. We want our listeners to get a feel for what it's like to go to the mission field, what would even cause you to make that decision. So you kind of already have opened up a few things I wanted to ask you about. Talk to us about here, somebody living in the States, United States of America, whether you're poor or rich, we live much better than most of the world. And
so true.
I think most of us realize that, but having lived stateside, and then you and your wife, your family going over there, being there for 5 years now, right?
Right. Well, it was actually just less than 4 years.
Okay.
So we're coming up on our 5th anniversary, but we're here in the States.
So celebrating your 5th anniversary, but talk to us a little bit about what I guess we would call culture shock or your initial reaction. What were some things you were surprised at? They're difficult. Just talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Sure. Well, let me talk about maybe our first few months, because when we got to the field, this is Uganda, where because South Sudan has been a closed country because of civil war, we felt like the Lord would take us to northern Uganda and work in the town of Adjumani. Adjumani is where there's 250,000 refugees.
Wow.
And so this was kind of the beginning of our ministry. And when we went over there, you don't know what to expect, really. You tell churches, we've taken survey trips, I've been to Africa several times, but you don't know exactly what you're going to do when you go. We know we're church planting missionaries.
Sure.
When we arrived, we were there for about a week, I think, and we were shopping, collecting things to take to our village. We're about 10 hours north of the capital. And as we were in the capital, the president announced there would be another COVID lockdown. And a lockdown in Uganda looks like you're not allowed to travel. You can't be on the roads. You have to stay in your house. And we had not purchased things that we needed to be in Africa.
Sure.
And so we just kind of took a step of faith and thought, look, this is where God has us to serve in Adjumani. We'll just go to the village. And when we went up there, we knew nobody in Adjumani town. We knew, we knew the Mahdi people, but you don't know the language. About 40% of the people there spoke English.
Wow.
So we went up, and I remember our first few months, we had a bed that we had purchased, and we had a plastic chair and some mosquito nets, and that was like our furnishings. And we lived for about 6 months with no power before I was able to get a generator, and it was 300 watts, ran a fan and a fridge.
Wow.
And my wife cooked on charcoal for our first, I think, 4 months.
So outdoor cooking.
Yeah, outdoor.
Wow.
And cooking on charcoal. It still amazes us to look back at those pictures.
Yeah.
And there was a time when the Lord just took us through and taught us a lot of things that we don't need. We live in America, the land that's just so blessed. And there are a lot of things we have that we don't need.
Yeah.
And the Lord just kind of refined us during that time to teach us the things that you really need in life. And so we went through this, we went through that time of culture shock where the people, they think we're weird, they think we're strange. One of the sayings they have there, they ask you if you're lost. This is an interesting cultural thing. They'll say, that means, what are you doing here?
Really? Okay.
And so we would have men just stand at our fence. We didn't know what they were saying. And they would just say, Mzungu, that's our name over there, white people. And they would say, Mzungu, are you lost? And we're like, what in the world? Why are we here?
Right.
It just means, it's not as offensive as it may seem, but it was just a cultural thing where we were unsure. There are many times when as you're trying to learn a language, we just know the greetings, and we can sing or quote a verse.
Sure. Now, you mentioned Mahdi. Am I saying that right?
Yeah,
Mahdi that is the predominant, would be a tribal language
there.
Or?
It is.
Okay.
The Mahdi tribe, the Mahdi language, and they're found on both sides of the Nile River, both in Uganda and South Sudan, but a very small region. And their culture is a culture of kindness, which makes it very easy to work there. Mm-hmm. They're unbelievably kind. They'll invite you over to your house.
Sure.
They're just doing it out of a courtesy. They don't necessarily want you to eat with them, but they'll say, "Hey, you're welcome to join us." And so you kind of learn, are they really welcoming me, or are they just being courteous?
That's almost convicting to those of us in a Western culture who have no doubt much more than those people.
Correct.
And yet they're willing to share what they have.
It's so true. They are generous people, which is why, in order for a family it's very rare to find wealthy people because they share their wealth.
Sure.
And so if someone is doing better, the family will come and like almost put demands on them.
Sure.
Like, hey, you're doing well. Our whole family should, do well.
Sure.
They're very clan minded. And so many different cultures. But one thing that we enjoyed about working with the people was just the fact that they were open and they were willing to just be patient with us. And as we would make mistakes, saying the wrong words or something like that, they were always gracious. They thought it was funny. Two of our girls were born there in Germany. And so...
and tell us real quick about your family, your wife's name, your 4 children, their names.
Yes, so it's I'm James, my wife is Abby, and then our firstborn is Arminda, she's 5, Jameson is 4, Annalise was born in Uganda, she's 2. 2. And then Amelia is 1. And so the 2 girls who were born there have Mahdi names as well. The culture gave them names. Monday Ku is the baby, and it means I will not grow tired. And so when they gave her that name, it's supposed to have a spiritual meaning like I won't get tired serving the Lord. But I promise when they gave her that name, she had never slept through the night again.
No.
And so
they will significantly watch a child and they say, here's a kind of a characteristic name. Is that what you mean?
They do. And the other girl, Annalise, her name is Mora, and it means don't forget us. And so we announced to the church, hey, we're going to be handing the church over and going into South Sudan. And they named our daughter Mora, which means don't forget us.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of things that were tied to the culture, and we live amongst the people. You think of what Paul said in Acts chapter 20, and Paul said, I've been with you in every season. Mm-hmm. And when we're reflecting on the time that we've been in Uganda as missionaries, we did a lot of things wrong, and we did, we make mistakes culturally, and just, we don't know. Mm-hmm. But one thing that we tried to do is just be with the people in every season. They go through different temperature seasons. They have rainy season and hot season. This is their hot season in February. And it's like 105, 110. Our hottest temperature we saw was 117.
Wow.
And I know like the fear or the thing that we think of is we need AC, but you really don't. And we're just be with the people in every season, and not just speaking those seasons also, but seasons of joy and seasons of grief. And we were with our church as they went through trials. And we learn a lot about the culture by going through those kind of trials with people in our church. And I think that's what Paul was telling the church at Ephesus there. He said, you knew I was with you for 3 years in every season. And so, yeah.
Now, tell me a little bit about ways that you guys have worked to earn the trust of the people. Again, going there, so many times they see Americans, or they lump us all together as visiting, but you're a tourist and you're there and you're gone. When was it? Was there a moment when it seemed that they said, wow, these folks are here to stay? Or was it after the first year that they really started opening up and saying, we trust you, we want, what you're trying to give us, the gospel? Or was it just gradual? Was there anything to that?
Wow, that is so true. They view aid workers as very temporary. People will go over there on temporary missions or something like that. I remember when we first went, everyone would ask for our things when we left. They would be like, hey, when you leave, we would just be meeting people.
So they were used to teams going over, digging a well, building a canal,
and then leaving.
And they're gone. Okay.
And, one of the things that we do when you go over there, you'll take a suitcase, and if you're going on a mission trip, and when you leave, you give away your clothes or something like that, just to help the people. And it's funny, for our first year and a half at least, people would ask us, they're like, hey, when you leave, can I have this?
Wow.
And it's just the idea of a missionary going and living with the people and staying is so foreign.
Wow.
And it took a long time for people to see, hey, we didn't come to leave, we came to work and stay.
Wow.
And it did happen gradually. A lot of people, of course, when we're planting a church, we're beginning with a handful of people. We're discipling those people, pouring in as much as we can. And several people were standoffish because they thought this is a white people church, or this is a believer church.
Sure.
This is something that's going to be temporary.
Sure.
And so it took a long time. Even in our immediate neighborhood, the people who saw us every day, we had a fence around our property, but it was chain link.
Sure.
And so people could see, we were very visible to the people.
Your whole life, not just your ministry time, everything's on display.
All the time. At any moment, we have people standing there talking where people they come to look.
So curious. They go out of their way to see who are these people, what are they about.
Exactly. Wow. And not just that, but anytime there was a funeral in our village or something like that, we would try to go. Just to let ourselves be known as part of the people.
Wow.
And funerals over there take days. They are very long, very drawn out, and they're frustrating. The first few you go to, you're very frustrated before you learn the culture. And then it takes time and you learn to bear through some of those things. But it took a long time for people to understand that we had come to work with their people. And we didn't come to hand out stuff and leave, take pictures and leave. We're not on a mission trip. We're missionaries.
Sure.
And it took a moment.
Wow. Talk to us a little bit about your family. And, obviously you all are a close-knit family, a team serving the Lord. I mean, it's one of the things I love about ministry, even my own family and wife stateside here. What are things that maybe were difficult for you all as a family? Just initially going there, not even seeing family as much as others would. And then what were things that maybe you would look at and say, this is a positive. We would have never enjoyed this had we not been on the mission field. Anything like that?
Yeah, I'll say this. When you go with little kids, there's always this fear. There's this overwhelming cloud that covers you because we're from a different culture.
Right.
In America, I would say we're more careful about how we protect our kids. When you go there, you think, man, there are ants that can kill you. Everything in Africa has teeth. Everything is hungry, and snakes and just different kinds of reptiles. And many of those things are dangerous. And
those would be things that would be in your compound,
oh, for
in
sure.
your home.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have many stories that we don't even have time to tell about the times when the Lord just protected us. We had a scorpion crawl into Arminda's bed when she was probably a year and a half and sting her.
Wow.
And they had no idea. We have a district hospital, and so about 3 wards are in buildings and about 3 wards are in tents.
Wow.
And we took her to the hospital. They had no idea what to do. They're like, normally we just see if it gets serious, we'll go to the city. So many things like that. And when you take a family, you're obviously, I'm called to missions, but that means that my wife, she's coming along. My children are coming along, and that's a big burden on a lot of people.
Sure.
And I could never do this if my wife wasn't on board, but she is, and she's ministry minded, and that makes it easier. But there are many things, the longer you live there, that you appreciate about their culture. One of the things is they are very family oriented, and so it's so easy to have a family there. They watch out for children. They protect kids. They love families. They love children. They love that we have kids. All those things are just a plus. It's a better culture to raise little kids in than what we would say in our American culture. When you think about the influence that we have through public schools or through all these kind of influences that kids have, they don't have those influences there. Right. There's not.
Is there any type of public education there?
There are government schools, and they're not necessarily great places either. However, normally because it's like understaffed.
Sure.
And so, the level of education is not as high, we would say. But they learn more with their families. Right. And so this is the side of things that we don't get in America. They're out working with their families. They're learning things. They're living in the village with their families. Young boys are expected to go out and watch the cows with the dads. And they all work together as a family to dig a garden. And those kind of things, those kind of family ties are unbelievably healthy for kids.
Yes.
They just are. And so those kind of a culture, that type of a culture is better to raise young kids in.
And so that is a plus versus the American culture.
For sure.
Mom's working, dad's working, kids at the daycare, then he goes to school.
For sure.
Sure.
And not just that, but you could even talk about like the food that they eat. And in our culture here, we have fast food and things like that. And those are a lot of things that aren't necessarily good for you, good for your health. And so like you could look at it that way. There are many different ways that you could look at it and say, you know what, it's a blessing that the Lord has us there. And you learn to enjoy it.
Yes.
And you learn to see the blessings from it.
That is awesome. Let me do a couple fun questions here, and then we'll kind of close out in a minute. This has been a blessing, fascinating, really, to learn about these things. Food. Everybody's interested when you go to any foreign country or a mission field. What are some of the craziest things you've ever eaten, and what things would you say, wow, it was actually pretty good?
Yeah.
So talk to us about that. What would be one of the most unusual or delicious dishes you've had there?
My family and I, we don't like spice. When we left America, we're not big into spice. And when we got to Uganda, they eat very plain foods. So they'll have like a maize meal, which is like a field corn. They grind field corn, and they cook it with water. And basically, it's very plain. But that's their biggest staple. Rice and posho. That stuff is called posho. And those are their biggest staple foods. We have that. About 5 meals a week we'll have posho or rice with beans.
Sure.
And so we began to appreciate spicy things just because it adds some flavor to the meal. They eat everything. It's amazing. They have several fruits, local fruits, that they eat that are just delicious that we don't eat. They also eat things like crickets, things like grasshoppers. Grasshoppers is one of the biggest delicacies in that area. And we have a season where they have these white ants, large white ants that fly. They fly out of the termite mounds. They come out in certain seasons. And so you can catch up with a flashlight. You go out at night, you dig a hole, you put a flashlight in the ground, and then they just come by the thousands.
So the light attracts them.
Yes.
That's how they're harvested.
And
wow.
then you go there and collect them, and they'll grind them into a paste like peanut butter.
Yes.
Or anything else. It's amazing. They eat these. We love them.
Yes.
Our kids love grasshoppers. Our kids love these white ants.
Uh-huh.
There's nothing that we've had there. There are some things that we say, okay, I don't prefer it. But the longer you're there, the more you enjoy their types of food. So,
wow.
Yes.
So the ways that they're prepared, I mean, is it you all, I guess, you cook and eat the same way that they eat there?
We do.
And that is neat. Does that help them to even accept that you are becoming part of their culture? You're becoming one of them?
Sure. And some of that isn't necessarily by choice as much as just by necessity.
Sure.
When we live in the village, we don't have restaurants. We're in the village. And so we eat the local food.
Sure.
And then you learn to like it and appreciate it. Probably our favorite meal is called osobi.
Osobi. What is osobi?
It's like this green, kind of like spinach. They'll grind it up, mix it with G-nut paste, peanut butter, and then they'll mix smoked fish in with it.
Wow. Okay.
It's the most unusual tasting thing, but it is quite good.
Yeah, that kind of sounds good. So,
yeah.
Wow. Well, let me just, as we kind of get to the end of our segment here, let me close with just a few questions. First, there's so many people that they try to think, what would it be like to actually go and do what the Baxters have done? Could I do that? Would I be able to do that? Talk to us maybe a little bit if there was a young lady or a young man watching or listening right now, and they were considering foreign missions. What would be some things you would encourage them about, and maybe some things you would even say, this would be an area of your life you need to really focus on, whether that be your walk with the Lord or your strength of understanding, His grace, and just talk to somebody who would potentially be looking into foreign missions.
Let me just start with this. It is not as hard as what we think. A lot of times we'll read books from 100 years ago, missionaries. They had no phones, they had no communication, they had no hospitals. There is a world opened up to missions, and it opens in several ways. First of all, you can communicate with your family. And we never had this overwhelming feeling like we were separated from our family. Now we've had several family come to see us. But you can get on the phone and you can call, we can FaceTime, we can do these kind of things. It makes connection with family so much more. You also have way more medically than we used to have. We're not going to have the same sort of issues medically that you would have had a long time ago. Those are big things that will keep someone from serving the Lord in a foreign field. They think it's so bad. The things in our mind, there's no AC, there's it is not as hard as you think.
So you will slowly adapt to that.
You adapt, but even obviously the Lord will give you grace when you're called, but honestly, don't think of it as something that you even have to adapt to. It's easy. Like, it's not difficult to serve the Lord in a foreign field. Here's the other big thing. Most of the world is learning English. South Sudan is a country that speaks probably less than 1% of the people speak English properly or fluently. And so when you think about that, but they're trying to learn English, and they made it their main language. If you look if you Google it, that they say English is our main language.
So that is aiding you in being able to get the
they're
message
trying
out.
to push. Most of the world, their business language is English. You can go to any country in the world, any country, and you will find an English-speaking people.
Wow.
And I think the Lord is just opening every opportunity for us to get in and witness and be a witness. It's not a challenge. Our biggest thing is we have to overcome our own mindset of thinking it's going to be harder than it is.
So it's more of the willingness to say,
sure.
Lord, I'm willing to trust you.
It's 100% us not coming to the point of surrender.
Yes.
And because we as a people are just stubborn. So what I would say to anyone who's even considering or not considering missions, even if you're not considering missions, come to the place of surrender.
Yes.
Where you say, Lord, whatever you have for me, I'm willing to do.
Amen.
And if you come to that place in your life, God will take you to somewhere where you can serve. It might not be the mission field, but it could be anywhere where He can use your life. So
let me finish with a final question for you. Tell me a favorite Bible character, maybe someone that has been a blessing to you that you look to, and how that character encourages you on the mission field.
Yeah, it's Paul, no doubt.
Without a doubt.
Paul is, he's a great missionary. He took the gospel. He was a church planter. Everything that you read about Paul, and Paul had his own struggles and challenges, health problems.
Yes.
There's no doubt that you can look at Paul's life and just learn innumerable amount of valuable lessons. I think outside of studying the life of Christ, the life of Paul is probably second to that.
Wow.
And it's amazing in every way. I don't even have time to tell you about it, but Paul has just been an amazing example and encouragement to us.
That's awesome. Well, Brother Baxter, thank you so much for your time today. And those that are listening, we hope that this broadcast has been a blessing to you. If you would, before we get off here, just tell them how they could learn more about you all in your ministry. Is there an email? Is there a website or something they can go to?
Our website and email are the same. It's Baxter's, the number 2, South Sudan. And that's at gmail.com, or it's at, I think that's our website, just Baxter's to South Sudan. And look us up, and you can follow us on Facebook. It's the same title, and it's a great way to stay in contact with us.
That's tremendous. Thank you. We'll put that information up also on the church website and at the end of this video. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, God bless you as you serve the King.